Okay, so my name is Jacob Lightfoot, and this is my recommendation report presentation comparing hydrogen fuel cell vehicles and internal combustion engine vehicles, or the vehicles that we know that just run on gasoline. Let's see. Okay, so why compare these two? So in America, transportation is super useful. We use it to go to and from work and school and other places. But with all that transportation comes a lot of emissions, and these emissions make up 28% of all of the greenhouse gas production in the United States. And this is the single largest category in the United States. And so they also contribute to greenhouse heating, which in turn leads to climate change and causes the earth to get slowly hotter. And then it also creates smog, which is shown here in this picture above the city. Another problem is that fossil fuels are limited, they're running out. And at the current rate that we're using them, we will only be sustained for another few decades at the most. So we need a transition to a more renewable energy. And so that's where the hydrogen fuel cell vehicle comes in, because it is a largely renewable vehicle, or runs on renewable energy at least. And so in this report, we're going to be comparing the two criteria for the two vehicles. It's going to be efficiency, energy efficiency. And so that's going to be defined as well to wheel. And so within well to wheel, this is where we have the production of the energy, and then the wheel is how much is distributed to the actual wheels. And so within well to wheel, we have well to tank and then tank to wheel. So the tank to wheel is how efficient the car itself is at using the energy that it's given. And the well to tank is how efficient the process is of getting the energy to either a gas station or a hydrogen fill up station. And so that's going to be the well to wheel efficiency is the criteria that we're going to be using for the energy efficiency. That's how we're going to gauge that. And then in terms of cost, we're going to be going off of three things. We're going to be looking at initial cost, the cost of refueling the vehicle, and thirdly, the maintenance cost. Okay, so in order to understand the efficiency and the emissions of these vehicles, we're first going to look at the four-stroke engine and how it functions and how it creates power using the energy it's given. So in the first stroke, we have the intake stroke, where the intake valve is open, the piston's traveling down, and it's sucking in air and fuel. That is going to be later compressed in the compression stroke, when the intake valve is closed and the piston's pushing upward, compressing the air and the fuel. That brings us into our power stroke, where the piston's at the top of the cylinder and the spark plug here ignites, causing the air and fuel to ignite and send the piston moving down. And then lastly, we have the exhaust stroke, where the piston's traveling up again and the exhaust valve is open, causing the gas to be pushed out. And then from there, we can go back into the intake stroke, where we suck air in again and do the whole process over and over. So this process rotates this crankshaft here, which is then hooked up to a drivetrain, like a transmission and an axle, that is able to distribute the energy made by the motor, the rotational movement, into the turning of the wheels. And so that is how an internal combustion engine turns gasoline into movement and how it uses its energy. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so this is a fuel cell. This is the basis of how a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle creates energy. And so on the left, on the anode, we have hydrogen entering in, just pure hydrogen. And then on the right, in the cathode, we have pure oxygen entering in from the atmosphere. And so on the left in the anode, we have the hydrogen being stripped of its electrons and being pushed into a circuit up here at the top. And so that's what that loop is. It's lighting up a like a little light in this diagram, but in reality, that would be being put into a circuit with a transformer that would be, or an inverter that would be making the electricity usable to the motors of the car, which in turn turns the wheel. And so after the electrons are stripped and the circuits used, the hydrogen is then paired with oxygen to create only byproducts of heat, shown here on the sides, I guess, both sides. There's heat as a byproduct, and then there's extra oxygen that's unpaired as a byproduct, and then also the water made from the combination of the oxygen and the hydrogen. And so the difference between the fuel cell and the internal combustion engine is this closed system here does not pollute. It doesn't, the only byproducts are air and water, which are like common things, and they're not destructive. Whereas the internal combustion engine produces nitrogen oxides, a lot of carbon monoxide, which in turn is the gas that causes greenhouse heating. Now, the fuel cell stack is just a much cleaner energy production process than the internal combustion engine is. Okay, so that leads us to the next slide. Here is the graph of the energy efficiency of both the internal combustion engine shown on the left and the fuel cell vehicle shown on the right. So let's see. So the internal combustion engine, the process of running the engine is it produces a lot of heat because of combustion. And so around 68 to 72% of energy in the engine is just lost to heat. And the rest is lost to braking and like wind aerodynamics, like just the wind resistance, and braking, like heat and friction losses. And so after those processes, the internal combustion engine vehicles are only left with about 20% efficiency with the energy. Now the fuel cell, before the gas is ever delivered to the car, the process of turning electricity into hydrogen is only about 75% efficient. So once the car gets that 75% of energy, it's passed through the fuel cell, which is only around 60% efficient. So that leaves us with the 38% shown here. So this is about almost double it, as almost twice as efficient as the internal combustion engine vehicle. So here we have the initial cost of both vehicles. So the technology in the fuel cell vehicle is a little newer. And these cars are usually luxury vehicles, and the technology in them is not found as common. It's currently only in like states like California. So that's one of the reasons that it's so expensive, and at least the starting price. Now there are incentives and government tax breaks and things like that for people that do buy fuel cell vehicles. So the initial cost can actually be brought down into the range of an internal combustion engine. And a lot of times when you buy a fuel cell vehicle, the price of fuel will be covered for up to around like 6 years. So that's not a cost, as opposed to the internal combustion engine, where the average person spends around $1,150 per year on gas. So, and then the maintenance costs for these, the maintenance is pretty similar, and there's no real differences in the maintenance from my research. So with cost, some of the incentives with the fuel cell vehicles can bring the cost, the overall cost to the same, if not even cheaper than the internal combustion engine vehicles. So the conclusion is that the fuel cell vehicles are more efficient, but with that, they are more expensive. And that's largely due to the new technology. But on the positive side, it uses a lot, it uses renewable energy as opposed to the combustion engine that uses fossil fuels, gasoline, and oil. So as far as the recommendation, I would recommend fuel cell vehicles in areas like California where they're currently available and sustainable. Everywhere else though, the internal combustion engine is currently the best option because of the availability and the cheaper cost. And so currently the internal combustion or the fuel cell vehicle only really makes sense in California, but that will change as the technology becomes more prominent, cheaper, and hopefully we'll see more of them in the future. Thank you.